All right. So this this section of the 2-2 notes, so just as a reminder, these were the notes that started off with the 2-2 structures of ecosystems. This section on the third page here, the abiotic factors. So we've talked about biotic and abiotic. Anybody remember what those terms mean?
Living and non-living.
That's fine. Go ahead.
Biotic is alive.
Yep. So living, and then abiotic is the non-living. Good. So biotic refers to living. Abiotic refers to the non-living, right? So here we're talking about non-living factors, and we're splitting those into two categories: conditions and resources. Okay. Conditions are abiotic factors that change over distance or time, but are not used up or made unavailable to other species. So I've given a bunch of examples here: weather, precipitation, terrain would be like flat versus mountain, like the land type. Air quality, climate, natural disasters, severe weather events, fire, things like that. So basically, what happens with those are factors that can influence, um, survival, reproduction, all of that stuff, like growth of an organism or a species, but you don't use them up. They just kind of exist, and it is what it is, how it affects it. Okay. Um, like for example, you don't use up all the altitude in an area. Like, yeah, animals might live at certain altitudes because it's more beneficial, or not live at other ones because they can't exist in them. But you don't use up the altitude in an area. So that's a condition. Okay. The resources are abiotic factors that are consumed or used by organisms and therefore are potentially limited or unavailable to other organisms or species. So, a few of these might seem a little weird. So, take for example oxygen. Like, no, oxygen in general for most terrestrial animals or whatever is not going to be used up. You're not going to use all the oxygen in an area or whatever. What this is referring to is actually aquatic. So I don't know if some of you are familiar with this or not, but some aquatic animals will use oxygen that's dissolved in the water, right, um, for survival and to live off of. And in those cases, due to like based on the amount of plants versus animals and all this kind of stuff, and you can actually change the oxygen saturation levels in water, and it can be too low. So you can't actually run out of saturation of oxygen in the water, and that can affect it. So that's what that's referring to. Um, so minerals and nutrients. So if you think about like plants needing those for growth and survival, those obviously can be used up. Okay, and those are still abiotic, but but they are needed for survival and growth. Um, and then some of these are actually like talking about us as the human as humans, natural like energy resources, right? Oil, coal, natural gas. Those are things that we use for our survival, um, and those can be used up. Metals, like mining of metals in the ground and stuff. Sunlight might be one that might be seen as a weird one, um, because obviously you don't run out of sunlight. Um, any idea why that one's there is like potentially limited? Yeah, go Bree.
The ocean depth.
Oh, that's a good one. I didn't think of that, but yes, that would be a factor. So, in places where sunlight can't reach as much, so caves or depths of oceans and stuff, definitely for sure. Um, the other thing that I was thinking of with the sunlight is think about like plant cover and stuff. So if you've ever walked in like a pretty dense forest, a lot of times you'll notice that the on like ground plants and smaller plants of ground, there's not as many of them, right? And that's just because the canopy basically shades out the ground underneath, and not a lot of sunlight reaches through. So while overall sunlight itself is not necessarily limited, the availability of it to certain organisms can be, and that can impact growth and survival and everything. So Water, same thing, living space, very similar with that. So those, remember, all of these are still abiotic, they're non-living, but we can split them into two categories as conditions or resources. Okay, any questions on those? All right. Let me stop